Good evening, good morning, good night. Whatever the case may be, you have tuned in to the right channel. It's me, your favorite history teacher that there ever was, past, present, or future. It's Coach Hughes. And we have been talking about the ancient Greeks, Sparta! If you ever seen the movie 300, it's pretty good. If you're underage, don't need to watch it, unless it's an edited version, that is, like on TV or something. So we have talked about a lot of things, and this kind of wraps up Chapter 9, Section 3, our conclusion, our allude, our farewell to the ancient Greeks. And we've been talking about the Greeks for a while because we have done two chapters, Chapter 8 and now Chapter 9, and now we kind of finish up. So our last lecture, we kind of talked about Athens and Sparta. They were building up each other's city states basically at the end of the Persians' wars, where actually Athens and Sparta, they kind of teamed up with each other. And I said this in the last lecture, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So Sparta and Athens kind of teamed up. They kicked Persia back to Persia, really, in the Persian Wars, but it left them powerful. It left them kind of in glee of themselves, kind of full of themselves. And really, it put them, Athens and Sparta, on a collision course leading up to something called the Peloponnesian War. If you remember from the last lecture, the Athenians were the brains, while the Spartans were the muscles, the physique, the athletic, if you would. But what was kind of surprising is the Spartans kind of outwitted the brains there in Athens. As you know from our discussions in Chapter 8, Greece was not great at farmland per se. Their soil was rocky, hilly, not a lot of farmland. They did farm, just not a lot of it. So they relied on imports, things being brought into their city states there in Athens. And really, the peninsula of Greece alluded to fishing as well. But the Athenians allowed the Spartans to build a navy, and when they did, the Spartans cut off their food supply, and that led to starvation to the point that the Athenians had to kind of raise the white flag and surrendered. That and Athens had a population of about 285,000 people that they had to put inside their walled cities, and disease broke out too. So those two things, starvation because of the blockade there, and the cutting off of the trade supplies by the Spartan Navy, and really disease that broke out in the city-state of Athens led to Athens surrendering. But Sparta didn't carry that torch long. They still warred with other Greek city-states, and they too were kind of weakened. So we're going to pick up kind of there where we left off on our last lecture, and we will start right here. So to the north of Greece lay Macedonia, and it was a powerful kingdom. It lay just to the north of the Greek peninsula there. Circle B, you need to know this name. About 360 BC, a guy named Philip II of Macedonia invaded Athens, and he won easily. And the rest of Greece kind of looked at that and said, hey, we just went through the Peloponnesian War, all the other wars. We give up. And then they surrendered. And Philip was kind of amazed how easy these dominoes of Greek city-states fell. Philip's victory resulted from his military strategy. And of course, if you've got superior weapons, that's always plays a factor in any well-earned victory there. For instance, one of the military tactics that he used, he extended the Greek idea of the phalanx. And by giving each soldier a spear, he extended that 16 feet long. Now, phalanx was a group of warriors who stood close together in a square. And after training a vast army, Philip began taking over Greek city-state City, state, city, state, city, state, like dominoes falling over. Circle E on this slide if you haven't, if you're paying attention, because this is probably going to be a quiz question and a test question for you in the future there. Now, Philip planned to conquer Persia, but he was murdered. Yes, I said murdered in about 336 BC, and his throne passed along to his 20-year-old son, Alexander. Now, there are some historians that believe that Alexander actually witnessed his father's murder. And if this is true, then you can imagine there was a lot of rage and anger that built up in young Alexander. And one thought probably crossed his mind: revenge on those that murdered my father. So, when Philip died, the people in the Greek city of Thebes, they said, hey, 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 Philip is dead. Philip is dead. Philip is dead. It's time to leave this kingdom he called Macedonia. It's time to expand. It's time for us to rebel. A rebellion is among us. Well, when the king dies, the throne is passed on to the son. And Alexander is still very, very young, and he's unproven. And Alexander knows this. He knows that he is not a proven leader, a proven king. So Alexander takes his military and he attacks Thebes, and he kills a lot of individuals, a lot of people, probably, according to some historians, even women and children. And he enslaved the rest of the people there in Thebes. And he used Thebes as an example of what would happen to any other Greek city-states that tried to rebel against him. So this is his stepping stone. This is what he wanted to be known for. He basically said, listen, if you try to rebel, don't think of me as a 20-year-old child. Think of me as a ruthless king that will come and destroy all of you. And the other Greek city-states were like, we're good. Good. Hey, we're good. We're okay here. We're good. And I don't think many rebelled after the rebellion there in Thebes. Now, Alexander went on to defeat the Persians time and time again. He even conquered Egypt, and he became ruler of what had been known as the Persian Empire. Alexander would eventually become known as Alexander the Great before his death. And he died at a very relatively young age of 33. And the reason that they came to call him Alexander the Great is basically because he pretty much conquered his known world, maybe with the exception of India and Asia and out toward the east there. But he is one of few people that could really say, well, wherever there were people, wherever there was land, I conquered it. He pretty much did. Okay. Now, he died, like I said, relatively young age of 33. And he had built in that time period an empire stretching all the way from the Adriatic Sea to the India and the upper Nile in the south. It was a vast empire, to say the least. And if you look at this picture right here, this is Alexander the Great. He was a warrior king. He would go into battle with his soldiers. And this is why his soldiers absolutely adored and loved him, because he was not a king that sat back on horseback and watched his troops go into battle. He was sometimes there in the front lines battling alongside his soldiers. He had been shot multiple times with a bow and arrow, no guns at this time. He had been stabbed on more occasions than once. He was a true leader, to say the least, because he led. He didn't sit back as other kings do. Now, there are some rumors about, well, how did he die? He must have died in battle, right? It depends on what historian you kind of ask. Alexander died unexpectedly with no obvious heir, no sons. Theories abound about Alexander's death, including one claim, and this is the claim that I tend to believe, that says his slave wife poisoned him because she had killed, or because I should say he had killed her family while she had watched. And ironically, this kind of comes full circle. If true, it comes full circle because you remember, some historians think that Alexander himself had watched his father be killed, his father be murdered. And then in one of his conquests, Alexander kills this woman's family while she herself watches. And then, for whatever reason, he becomes smitten with this woman and takes her as a slave wife. And then some historians say that she was very bitter to start with, but possibly devised a plan, warmed up to Alexander, made his guard even dropped. Now, in the ancient world, many times you had what they called food testers. And how these food testers worked is basically they would have somebody come in and eat a portion of the king's meal, in this case, Alexander. And then if they didn't die or if anything didn't happen to them, then Alexander would drink possibly the wine and eat the food. But if this regulation is true, then you have to think that Alexander warmed up to his slave wife, the slave wife possibly hatching evil plan when Alexander's guard had dropped. Some historians believe she probably poisoned him. He ate it and then died relatively young at age 33. And there's some other theories out there. I tend to go with this theory. Now, with no clear direction, his generals fought for power as they would. His empire turns to chaos. Eventually, three distinctive Hellenistic kingdoms emerged. You need to know this for the quiz. You need to know this for the test. Circle F. Those three kingdoms that emerged after Alexander's death was Macedonia, which included Greece, Syria, and then Egypt. So you could say four if you include Greece. So Macedonia, Greece, Syria, and Egypt. Now, Alexander's conquests marked the beginning of something called the Hellenistic era. Circle A. This was a time of Greek prosperity. Greek language was everywhere. Greek ideas spread to non-Greek areas in Southwest Asia. Basically, remember, I had said that Alexander had conquered really the known world. So with that being said, anywhere in the known world, Greek culture expanded because of Alexander. The Greek language expanded. If you wanted to do business, you had to do business in the Greek language. Now, after Alexander's death, government business in the four kingdoms, that would be Macedonia, Greece, Syria, and Egypt, was conducted only in the Greek language. People who did not speak Greek, you couldn't get a job because you couldn't understand what to do. You couldn't run a business if you didn't understand the Greek language. This helped the Greeks maintain control over a vast area of land even after Alexander's death. Now, new cities were created in the Hellenistic era, and these cities needed architects. They needed engineers to build buildings in these new cities. They needed philosophers, teachers, if you would. And this allowed Greek culture to spread even to these newly formed cities. Now, the rulers of the four kingdoms sent Greek colonists all over Southwest Asia to help build up the cities. And this way, Greek culture even continues to spread long after Alexander the Great's death. Now, although the Hellenistic culture flourished in all three, you could say four, Macedonia and Greece, remember, combined, Syria and Egypt, kingdoms, it particularly spread and flourished in Alexandria, which was in Egypt. And yes, Alexandria is named after Alexander the Great. And it became kind of the center of this Greek culture and learning for all of the kingdoms. And it fell to the growing power of Rome when Rome starts to emerge. Next couple of chapters we'll talk about in 60 to 30 BC. Now, the ancient Greeks were master artists. They really were. Their paintings and statues have been admired for hundreds of years. They have been copied, duplicated over this course of time. Greek sculptors, circle B here, Greek sculptors studied the human body, especially how it looks when moving. Now, they're not the first people to do this. Remember, the Egyptians, they kind of did their artwork, their Book of the Dead, kind of almost in 3D. It was still 2D, but it was in a way to where the Egyptians made it look like it was moving kind of off the page. So the Greeks were not the first to kind of come up with this concept. They used what they learned when they made their statues. Greek artists painted very detailed scenes on vases, pots, and other vessels that they made. The remains of the Greek architecture show just how much the Greeks took time in designing and building so they would reflect the true beauty of really all of their Greek cities, even the ones that they were kind of sent out to build after Alexander's death. Now, Greek architecture included columns, which were first made of wood. Didn't work out too well. Later, the Greeks began using marble, which did, and really, many of today's church buildings, government buildings, and even school buildings have these big columns out in front. And this is a true kind of prelude to the Greek architecture style of the Hellenistic era. Now, historians were interested in lessons that history couldn't teach. They tried to figure out what caused wars so the Greeks could learn from their mistakes to avoid similar wars in the future. It's always been said that if you don't know your history, you are doomed to repeat that history, and the Greeks really didn't want to do that. Now, let's talk about philosophy for a few minutes. Circle A. The word philosophy comes from the Greek word love of wisdom. And Greek thinkers called philosophers believed that the human mind, yes, your human mind, you, the person who are listening to this lecture now, your mind could understand everything. And really, if you do any research at all, humans really use a very small percentage of their brain capacity. If you've ever watched the movie Lucy, she kind of comes in involved with this drug that enables her to kind of expand and use her brain power up to 100%. And the things that theoretically that you could do if that happened are mind-boggling. Probably even telekinesis, where you're communicating with someone just by looking at them, just by thinking about them. And this was kind of this true philosophy. Circle C. Socrates. No, it's not Socrates. If you ever watch Bill and Ted's Most Excellent Adventures, they will call him or Socrates. Socrates is how you pronounce it. Now, Socrates believed that people must never, ever stop looking for knowledge. You are lifelong learners, whether you want to be, whether you think you will be. you are. You're going to learn something for the rest of your life. It's guaranteed. He taught by asking questions. The more questions that you ask, the more that you know. You ever think about why young children ask so many questions? Is because they are curious. They want to know. They want to expand their mind and knowledge. When people answered, he challenged even their answers with more questions. Why? 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 And it kind of sounds like a toddler debate. When you answer a toddler's questions, they usually follow up with the question, why? 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 Socrates, challenge your knowledge. Now, leaders didn't trust Socrates, especially Greek leaders. And they even accused Socrates of teaching young Athenians to rebel. Why? Because he's teaching them, don't believe what you're told, ask questions. And government leaders at this time, well, they did not want you to ask questions. So the leaders tried and sentenced Socrates to death because he was teaching young individuals to think for themselves. It's a real eye opener. Do you go along with the majority, or do you question why things happen? Now, Circle E, the Socratic method, as it become known as, is a form of teaching that uses questions to lead students to discover things for themselves. Ask questions, learn why. Socrates had many students, and one of those students' names was Plato, not like the squishy Play-Doh that you played with when you're a kid, but an actual person's name, Plato, created a school called the Academy, Circle F, to which students, philosophers, thinkers, and even scientists could come and really kind of openly discuss ideas and theories of the time. Circle G, in his book, known as The Republic, Plato himself described the ideal government. The top, if you put it in a social kind of pyramid shape, at the top were rulers and, well, philosophers. Because, come on, if you're going to make a book and you're going to have an ideal government, you want to put your profession, your thing, kind of at the top because that would make you the upper class. Okay, so he probably had a little bit to do with pushing for the philosophers to be at the top. In the middle were warriors because you needed to protect the people at the top, and at the bottom, well, all you other people. Kind of sounds like he didn't really think this through to some degree. Now, Plato had a student. You kind of see our tree going down and out here. Plato's student was a guy named Aristotle, and he taught that people should live in moderation or balance. And he believed that moderation was based on, of course, reason. You shouldn't do something to an extreme, but you shouldn't do it to a degree that it's going to be lacking either. Aristotle also made great advances in the field of, well, logic, the process of making inferences, reasoning, and was well known in the scientific community. One of my favorite names to say, Euclid. Euclid, for all of you math lovers out there, was one of the most famous Greek mathematicians. And if you've ever thought about or had to describe plane geometry, you need to look at the guy over here in this picture, Euclid. All right. Plane geometry, of course, you knew this, is the study of points, lines, angles, and, well, surfaces. Probably everything an engineer or future engineer will need to know. One of my personal favorite scientists, Greek scientists, is a guy named Archimedes. And Archimedes was the most famous scientist of the Hellenistic era. And I don't know why I'm talking in this accent. I don't even know what accent this is. He worked on solid geometry and the study of, well, spheres, that's circles, and cylinders. But the reason I like Archimedes is because Mythbusters dedicated a whole episode to something that we'll talk about here in just a second. Archimedes, he also determined the value of pi, 3.1478, 10, 11, 12. I don't know the numbers after 3.14. Okay. Archimedes invented the catapult as well. Really cool to build a catapult. But the Mythbusters episode that I was alluding to, if you go in and you find Mythbusters, whether it's on Netflix or whatever, it's the death ray, using mirrors to blow up things. And well, I think Mythbusters pretty much said that's well, a myth. Now, circle D. You need to know D as well. Greek doctors like Hippocrates wanted to cure diseases and really help healthy people stay healthy, really. And any doctor or nurse today, you have to take the Hippocratic oath when you become a nurse or doctor. And one of the big things is I will do no harm. And we got that from that individual. Now, Greek inventors also made many discoveries that, are still, quite frankly, in use today, from practical devices like the water screw. It's just kind of a screw that brings water from the bottom to the top, and really a lot of your playful mechanical toys when you had or when you were younger. All right. Couple of things to review. How did Alexander help spread Greek culture throughout the world? Well, he pretty much conquered the known world and list and describe three major Greek accomplishments in the areas of art, philosophy, math, and science. You could name Archimedes, Euclid, Plato, Socrates, the Socratic method, any of those things. That will basically conclude and wrap up in a nice little bow, Chapter 9, the Ancient Greeks. Hopefully, you learned something. Maybe. At least one thing? Maybe. All right. Until we meet again, God bless. Take care. And as always, from Coach Hughes, roll tide.